This month in 1867, 2,000 workers went on strike during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Over 15,000 Chinese laborers worked the dirtiest and most dangerous jobs in the Sierra Mountains and were paid less than white workers. They faced racism, violence, and later exclusion with the passage of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the first and only legislation to explicitly suspend immigration for a nationality. Today, we're seeing a rise in anti-Asian sentiment that has led to closed businesses, unwarranted blame for the coronavirus, and led to hate crimes against Asian Americans. I'm Yoonj Kim, and over the next few weeks, we'll be discussing the significance of these historic moments and what it tells us about what's happening today. I'll be in conversation with Lisa Sasaki, the interim director of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. Lisa, tell us about the Transcontinental Railroad and what was happening with Chinese laborers at the time.
The Transcontinental Railroad was an important way to connect a nation. And as a result of that, there was a lot of labor, and much of the labor that was done in California and through Utah was done primarily by Chinese laborers, men who were coming over from China specifically to work on the railroads. And it was an incredibly dangerous job. Many lives were lost as a part of this. And then once they got there and the railroad was completed as part of a golden spike ceremony.
With a final golden spike, east meets west at Promontory Point, Utah in 1869. A photographer captures the sharing of a democratic cup of success. But the official engraving omits not only the cup, but the Irish and Chinese laborers as well.
The amazing photographs that we have of the time, you actually don't see any of the Chinese laborers who helped make that possible.
And what does the treatment of the Chinese laborers on the railroad tell us about the treatment of AAPI immigrants in the United States at the time in general?
Oftentimes, these labor groups that were coming in were seen as a cheap source of labor, that they were specifically brought in by large companies in order to keep the costs down. What that ended up doing, however, is putting them directly into conflict with communities of farmers or laborers that already existed within those communities. Many who thought that this sort of quote-unquote cheap labor was actually coming in and threatening their own livelihoods. And as a result, we start to see propaganda coming out about a yellow peril, how dangerous these others are coming from different parts of the world and how much of a threat they are to the United States. Oftentimes, many of these Chinese laborers were not staying in the United States, actually. What they would do is be here for the jobs that they were hired to do with full intentions of going back. However, we do have community members who can trace their ancestry back to the railroad workers who decided to stay.
And how did all of these events, the culmination of these events, the yellow peril, the railroad strike, how did these lead to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, and what was it?
The Chinese Exclusion Act is the first legislation that we've ever seen before in the United States that restricted immigration purely by nationality. And that goes to the amount of fear that people had here in the United States about the labor coming over, specifically from China. And then when the legislation was expanded, so whether that's the Immigration Act of 1924, for example, which specifically mentions Japan and limited immigration from Japan and other Asian countries, you then had those companies then go to the next country, the Philippines, after that, in a series of, sort of changes in order to work around the legislation. But I think what's so amazing about this is over time, what did end up happening is these strikes. So even the laborers who were brought over started to realize just the amount that they were doing, the danger that they were in was not worth what they were getting paid. And so the strikes came about, unions came about. We saw many, many communities who worked across language barriers, across differences, to come together in order to be able to promote and to demand better working conditions. A great story of that, for example, happened in Hawaii on the plantations that were there. And companies were bringing in workers, oftentimes specifically so that they couldn't speak each other's language. And that's one of the reasons why Pidgin, Hawaiian Pidgin, came into existence. It was the workers finding a way in which they could communicate with one another using different words from their own languages in order to communicate.
Wow, I think that's just a testament to the will of the immigrant to survive even in the most oppressive conditions. The fact that they created this new language to unify. That's really inspiring, and it reminds me of what's going on right now with a lot of the resistance and the hate against Asian-run businesses, and how the community is still working together to support each other through the coronavirus and through the epidemic of hate. What lessons can we learn from the history you just described?
Well, we learn from this that oftentimes groups get targeted for really no reason other than fear. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can take away, is that if we set our fear aside, we start to realize that these are just men, women, children, families who are just trying to exist in the same situation that we all are in. The coronavirus is a great example of that. So I think what we can really take away from this is first address the fear, and then also to stand together in solidarity with one another. How important it is that when we all come together and realize that we're all Americans, that we are all working under the same restrictions, the same crisis, that we can actually grow together and be stronger together.
Stand up and fight back. Let them know who we are. We are Asian Americans. Bring your flags.
So far, we've been talking mostly about Asian Americans were first laborers in this country, most like other immigrants. So where did this model minority stereotype come from?
They were laborers, but they also, when they got here, they started their own businesses. They created their own communities that had newspapers and needed doctors and lawyers. There's also a part of the model minority myth that has to do with assimilation. So Asians were also seen as being model in the fact that they were willing to assimilate into mainstream America. And as a result of that, they were often seen as being a model for assimilation, and therefore the model minority going forward. What it's really done, I think, now is that it's created sort of this myth that all Asian Americans are successful. But I think more importantly, what it also does is it doesn't fully articulate the wide breadth of the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, which, there are over 70 different countries in which our communities originate from, over 100 different languages spoken. And so when you put everybody together under this one heading, you oftentimes miss really important statistics, information, demographics that can tell you a lot about what individual communities are going through. But we can't forget that there are many as well who are living under the poverty line because they are doing jobs, taking care of people in nursing homes or in hospitals, or working in service industries like nail salons, restaurants, where we start to see that they're unable to make a living wage. But if they're part of this model minority where everyone is successful simply because you're Asian and they don't benefit from the same services and support that they need in order to be successful.
Can you tell us about the case of Vincent Chin and how that was a rallying cry for Asian Americans across the country to unite?
Definitely. It also goes back to what we've been talking about related to enterprise and fear. Back in the 80s, the auto industry was seeing great competition from Asia, specifically Japan, where many auto working plants were shutting down, the assembly lines were shutting down, and as a result, people were losing their jobs. And there was a lot of fear, economic fear, where their paychecks would be coming from, and a lot of anger that was misdirected towards Asian Americans. And Vincent Chin was killed because his attackers mistakenly thought that he was Japanese. What this really has taught us is the importance of of solidarity within the Asian American community, that Vincent Chin could be anyone who happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, who did nothing, didn't deserve anything, but simply because of the way he looked, that he was targeted.
Right, and it speaks to the point that the Asian American community and Asian neighborhoods kind of have to rally together and support each other in ethnic enclaves. Tell us about why exactly this is so important.
Right now, we're actually seeing, because of the coronavirus, Chinatowns have been hit with so many economic pressures. You saw that people weren't going to Chinatown because they were afraid that somehow that they would be more likely to be exposed there or in an Asian market than they would be in their normal grocery stores. And what we know now, thanks to the science and to the tracking of the virus, we know that actually the majority of cases had come over through Europe rather than through Asia. But these communities have been operating under economic stress for months and months and months before the other businesses across the United States felt it.
Absolutely. That's why I try to make it a point to order something from an Asian-run business, or to go directly into Koreatown, where I grew up, or a Chinatown, and order takeout from there, because it just goes such a long way after everything you mentioned, the ravages of the coronavirus and the discrimination, to continue supporting these communities.
I have spent a lot of time in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. And so I will say that Fugetsudo is one of my favorite bakeries in Los Angeles. So if you ever have a chance to go and get a piece of sweets, a piece of mochi from there, I would highly recommend it.
Oh yeah, that sounds so good right now.